that sex is not about self and about self-fulfillment and self-enjoyment, but it is about giving yourself to another person within the safe, secure relationship of marriage, and that it's something to be honoured. It's exclusive, and it is set apart. It's holy, which is what then reflects the relationship you enjoy with Christ.
Hello and welcome to Ordinary, the podcast that aims to help Christians live for Christ in everyday life. My name is Josh Bannister, one of the hosts here on Ordinary. This week, Graham Nicholls sat down with Amy and Ollie to talk about their experiences in relationships before their marriage and how that's affected their faith as Christians. Enjoy the episode.
My name is Graham Nicholls.
I'm Amy.
And I'm Ollie.
And welcome to Ordinary. Welcome to a new season of Ordinary, episode 2. And today we've got some very special guests. So Josh and Mark having a rest. And we've got Amy and Ollie, who are our special guests for today. And we thought it'd be useful to follow up on a couple of the ones we did last season, which were about purity, particularly purity before marriage, but also purity in marriage. And if you remember a little while ago, we had 3 ladies on who were kind of talking through their experiences as Christian people, one a young person who's not yet married and the other 2 that were married, just talking through something of their experience. And we thought it'd be really helpful if we talk to a couple of people who are Christians, but who have had quite different experiences in growing up as not being Christians, and the whole kind of culture, particularly to do with sexual ethics that was around them at the time. So we thought it'd be great to chat to them, and they very kindly agreed to talk a little bit about their experiences. So first of all, very quick introductions. Ollie, just tell us a couple of quick things about yourself and your sort of current situation.
So I'm living in southeast London. I'm the pastor of a FIEC church here, Elmstead Baptist Church. I'm married to Rachel. We've been married for 16 years, I think it is. And we've got 4 kids, Phoebe, Isaac, Theo and Boaz. Well remembered. Thank you.
Amy, anything just about yourself, who you are, maybe your sort of situation now?
Can I just reel off the same stuff as Ollie? Like where I live?
Yeah.
I live in...
Yeah, all that good stuff. He gave you the lead. It's all right.
I live in Haywards Heath. I am married to Adam. I also have 4 children. Violet, Blake, Ivy and Jensen. Been married about nearly 4 years? 3 years? 3 years. Nearly 4?
Yeah, 2018, so it's 3 years and a bit, I think.
Yeah.
And also, what we all 3 have in common is what? Apart from being Christians.
Oh, go on.
We all own dogs.
Own dogs. Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that could be an interesting fact about us to know. So, starting with you, Amy, just talk a little bit.
Your wardrobe door is opening again.
That was well creepy, wasn't it? I saw that. I didn't want to say anything. I was like, oh.
Got to get rid of it, and they can decide whether to cut that out in the final cut or not. It might be just part of the authenticity of it. Okay, growing up, Amy, just talk a little bit about your experience, what kind of model you were kind of seeing from your family and from your friends, particularly when it came to sex and relationships. Just talk us through that for a couple of minutes. That'd be great, Amy.
I don't think I had a particularly unhealthy model with my parents. They were together quite young, and I would say in a committed relationship for a while, for like a fair few years. And me and my sister, when they were never married, and I think, for me, marriage wasn't an important thing. It wasn't important to them to get married. So I was like, well, some people do, some people don't. They're committed. They love each other. They're my parents, but they're just not married. And I thought, our family was fairly wholesome. I think also as a teenager, I didn't have a lot I didn't have a lot of chats with my parents about sort of relationships and sex and that sort of thing. It was more just you kind of grow up in your surroundings and I guess, yeah, it wasn't like a sit down, this is, how you should be, it was more quote unquote natural, I guess, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And it may be significant or it may be not that your parents didn't stay together in your sort of young teens. Is that right?
That is right. No, they didn't. And I think, again, it was painful as children to go through that, me and my sister, but it was also sort of normal. Like a lot of my friends had, split families. A lot of my friends had stepmums or stepdads, and it was just normal in a way that it was also kind of, you were sad about it, and it was sad that your family was no longer a family anymore, but in a way you shouldn't be sad about it because it was normal and it just happened, and your parents aren't together anymore, so what? Like they want to be happy with other people, and
yeah. Did it have an effect at all though on your ability or your freedom or any of those things?
My freedom, definitely, in that I probably at a young age was allowed to get away with a lot more than if my parents were still together. I think my dad, he was very strict. He was very, just kind of normal. And my mum would go along with that. And then when they weren't together anymore, that sort of fell away. And I was sort of like, 15, 16, just sort of like in a really free environment to do what I wanted, go where I wanted, stay where I wanted with whoever I wanted. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Ollie, just similar, well, the same question basically, just a quick sketch on that.
Yeah, so my parents split up when I was 10. My mum left my dad with a guy who became and still is my stepdad. So I think they've been married 28 years now. So we left with her and with him. They were great, loving, did a good job with us, but they didn't have a biblical ethic for purity, for sex, and that desire to love us, I think, came out in they wanted to be very open about sex. So it was, there were lots of conversations about it, jokes about it. We were able to watch stuff on TV, programs, comedians, that kind of stuff, where there were, lots of jokes, lots of explicit references or depictions of sex. On the one hand, that meant that it was easy to talk about. On the other hand, it meant that there was a lot of exposure to it. Yeah. I think basically particularly my mum's view was, well, it's best if we know about it and it's being done safely than it being done behind our backs. And that, similar to Amy, that meant there wasn't a lot of restrictions on who I saw, when I saw them, what we did when I saw them. I had girlfriends staying over from quite a young age.
Yeah, take us into that, and then we'll come back to you in a moment, Amy. But without needing to be specific about names and places and precise experiences, but what was your experience and sort of timing-ish of getting into intimate sexual relationships, and what were the motivations?
Do you mean timing in terms of age, or?
Yeah, just sort of roughly.
Yeah, I was 14.
Sure.
So I was very young.
And what were the motivations? What was driving you? What was in the culture around you? It wasn't so much a precise age, by the way.
Oh, well, too late now.
It was more. It was more sort of young teens. I should have been better in the question, but that's fine. what was the motivation? What was driving you? What was making it happen? Was it simply desire?
No, I think...
Was it peer pressure?
Yeah, I think I'm the generation of Friends and American Pie. And if you haven't watched those things, I don't recommend them to you. But they really do accurately depict the culture of my teenage years, which was, it's about, you should be having sex as quickly as you can, as often as you can. American Pie is about a group of teenagers trying to lose their virginity before they finish high school. And that was the experience. We were all talking about, have you got a girlfriend? What have you done with your girlfriend? How far have you gone with your girlfriend? It became a bit of a race. So there was, I guess, kudos in it. I'm the guy that has gone this far or gone that far. And I think that had two impacts. I think for guys, so this is generalisation. For guys, it was about the status of it and going as far as you can, as quickly as you can. And I think that implicitly put a pressure on girls to be, well, okay, I better do this then. That seems to be, reflecting back on it, what the case was.
Yeah. Presumably you wanted to do it as well, so there was a degree of desire as well, I suppose, in the moment.
Yeah.
That would be normal for any human being. What about you, Amy? Again, not being specific, but your sort of timeline of getting involved in intimate relationships, and what was driving you at the time?
I mean, I don't know whether it's because I'm a girl, but I don't think I had the same sort of, it was like a race, or like I had to do it, or, who was the first, in our class or whatever. I think it was more, it just wasn't a big thing. It was like, oh, I've got a boyfriend, and, that's just what you did. It wasn't something that you would, be like, oh my goodness, like I've got a boyfriend, you wouldn't laugh, but I mean that in my experience anyway, it was just what you did. That was it.
Yeah. Just to understand, was there a desire? Was there anything going on to do with it? Because with Ollie, it was more competition. Did you want to be nurtured, or did you want affection? Did you want love? Did you want security, or any of those things, or do you just not think about them at that age?
That's deep. I don't know whether... I think a lot of this is based on when I was 15 in a quote-unquote relationship with someone who was a lot older than me. So I guess in a way I was just following his lead, and this is how relationships were. I don't know if I was very reflective on it at the time. I think there was probably a bit of me that thought I was really cool because I was like... in school, but I had this really old boyfriend who had a car, who, I could bunk off of school with, and, and all of my other friends would be like, oh, she's got, whatever. So, yeah, I don't know if I was that reflective in what can I get from this person in terms of security. I think it was probably just, just dumb kids.
Yeah. It's a bit of a harsh question to both of you, but do you think you were in love with the people you were sleeping with, mostly?
No.
Yeah, I think I did. So I didn't do a lot of sleeping around. I had a lot of different partners, as it turned out, but it was always within a relationship, or sorry, not always, often within a relationship where I felt like I loved that person, but it didn't take very much for me to not love them anymore. So it was more romantic infatuation, I think, that wore off pretty quick. It wasn't what I would now understand love to be.
No. It's just a cultural observation that I think my generation were also having a lot of sex, my peers at school and so forth, but I think it was mostly more sort of as a part of a close relationship, and even sort of my generation were thinking maybe they might get married to this person, I think it sort of moved more towards sort of shorter connection or less connection between the sex and the relationship. And I think now, and just talking to people who are at university now and so forth, there's almost a complete disconnect, which I don't think was quite what you guys experienced, a complete disconnect. So where sex is over here like buying a sandwich and relationship is over here and, can be deep and intimate, and the two don't really have to connect at all. You can have sort of open relationships because, it's more of a biological function. Do you want to say something?
I think there was both. I had a flatmate at uni that would bring a different girl back almost every night, and presumably the girls were happy with that, and that it would be nothing. It would be one night stands. So that that was that kind of, it's like a vending machine almost, and yet there were also, that there was the people that were seeing this as part of a relationship. I wouldn't say that they were thinking about marriage, definitely not. But it was about they wanted to know a bit of the person before that happened.
Yeah. Do you want to say anything into that, Amy?
I think definitely my experience of dating as I got older probably shifted more towards the, not having much of like, a commitment to the person or like an emotional attachment, that like my experience. So probably similar to Ollie.
So it got worse kind of thing.
Yeah, I think so. Like, just more disconnected from, ever seeing like a relationship with this person. Almost as if, you could be intimate with someone, but you'd always be thinking, well, we might not, materialize into anything, so I best not be invested in any way. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like as if, that will come later. Like you kind of go all in one aspect.
Yeah.
And that's it. And then you say, well, if it goes any further, then I'll start to invest a little bit more. But for now, yeah.
Yeah. It's what in the book Love Thy Body it talks about in terms of making promises with your body that you haven't made with your mind and heart.
Yeah.
Which, so I'm not trying to critique you, but no, I'm just trying to say
that is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Let's move on, because otherwise it becomes just a bit of a kind of sort of an interest story and your various experiences. Be great to move on, because both of you have become Christians now. We haven't got time to talk about how you became Christians. That would be for another story sometime. But you became Christians. You sort of changed your relationships situation in both your cases, I know, and sort of stopped the relationships style you were in, and then eventually both of you married, as you said at the beginning. So what I'm interested in really is how you think about those days now as a Christian, and what you think about God's plan for sex and in marriage, and kind of what would you have liked to have told your young self? So how do you think about it now? What would you like to have told your young self? And then we'll think about the impact on your current relationships in just a minute. But yeah, what do you think about it now? How would you like, if we start with you, Amy, and then go to you, Ollie?
Which one first? Ask me one.
How would you feel about it now?
How would I feel about...
How do you feel about those days now?
Not great. I think it's definitely, it's not something I'd look back on and be like, oh, that was a lot of fun. What mischief I got myself into. Because knowing what I know now and knowing God's plan for me, it just feels offensive. It just feels just wrong. But at the same time, it was me, and it was, I did do those things, and it brought me to where I am now. So it's a kind of it's a back and forth of those two things.
Do you feel shame or just sadness, or how would you characterise it as a Christian?
As a Christian, I think obviously there's an element of shame in it. I think there's an element of sadness for my younger self. in a strange way, it's almost like I'm looking back at someone that isn't really me. And I'm looking back on this young girl and I'm just feeling really sad for her because she hasn't got, a direction. She doesn't have, the knowledge that I know now, and she's making all these, stupid choices, and it's just, and I feel sad in that way. But then also relief because, it's not me anymore.
And Ollie, I'll ask you that question, and maybe you can ask the second half as well about, what do you think about God's rules for marriage now as well? But what do you think about those days now? How do you kind of put them in a box?
Shame, ashamed, sad, and just stupid, I think actually is my overwhelming. I would love to go back to my younger self and say, what you're doing now is going to take years to sort out and repair and reorientate, and it's going to cause you a load of grief before you get married, and actually once you've got married, and it's definitely not worth it. It's frustrating, stupid, ashamed, and I think, given that I feel like that about it, it gives you an insight into what I think about God's design, which is that actually it is something that is good, safe, beautiful, and gives the right framework to experience and enjoy what is a wonderful gift, but a very powerful one. I think, when I was talking earlier about, you asked the question about whether we're in love. It wasn't in love, but it was playing with some very powerful emotions, and that causes damage when you do that in an unsafe way. Causes harm. So I think God's design both protects, but it also promotes something that's much more beautiful and healthy, and points towards something that is even more incredible, which is the intimacy. The most intimate relationship a human being can enjoy is being united to Christ, which marriage and even sex are pointing you towards. And I really struggle with that even today. That feels a bit weird, awkward. And I think the reason I find that such a difficult picture is because of the damage that's been done in the past.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Did you want to say anything on that question, Amy?
Remind me of the question again?
Well, it was about what would you say to your old self now? Because you answered more the question about how you feel about those days now. Or what would you say about God's design for sex within marriage? Obviously, you had a slightly different experience with that, but now you're kind of inside a marriage, and you obviously have a view about it.
Yeah, I think similar to Ollie in that it just feels safe and secure and how it should be. I think I had different experience because I had children before I became a Christian, and obviously brought my children into my Christian marriage. So, I think building a framework for them and a family for them in, a Christian marriage is completely different than anything I would have, as a single mum or, anything like that.
Talking about your current relationships then, Ollie first, has it brought Rubble in? So I think what you've been saying is that, well, maybe I'll say it just to be clear, that the gospel means that we don't feel shame, but we do repent of things in the past. The shame is taken away by what Christ has done, but there's still the sadness with it, and the right kind of shame, but not the shame that makes us hide, but it is the shame that says that was wrong. But the gospel means Jesus has died for that sin, as indeed many other sins, and I am clean and pure and accepted, and actually many of the things that happened during that time what kind of shaped who I am now, and God kind of used it for good, just like in through the Bible, even sinful experiences God eventually turned around for good. And that doesn't mean the sin was right, but it just means God is better than that. And I think that's Amy's experience, where you could say, well, 2 wonderful children came out of it, and in a way it led the path to her desperation that she sought Christ and then became a Christian. So you can say, well, God used that all for good. That doesn't mean it was all right, but it just means it was good. So having said all that, you should be completely balanced and reasonable when you go into a new relationship or a marriage. Or is there a rubble that you carry in, do you think, Ollie?
Yeah, for sure. That I think all sin carries, that I refer to it as legacy issues. There are implications of that sin that take time to work out and work through, and often actually I didn't realise how deep those legacy issues were until I was in that marriage relationship. That even though I'm married to the person I had a relationship with before I was married, it was that the changing of that relationship and everything that marriage involves that exposed a lot of the issues that have been created because of my past. So, if you take that image of it's not just marriage but sex that creates a one flesh union, yeah, and that's not just a theoretical thing, it's a relational thing. So if you're bonded to someone and you then rip that apart, you detach yourself from that person, then that's going to damage things. Yeah, is it? People watch that program, The Repair Shop, and that if you've glued 2 things together and they get pulled apart, it creates damage. Now, the gospel can repair and restore that damage, but that, to stick with the Repair Shop thing, that can often be a painstaking, careful, long-term work. And I think for me, it's not so much about the shame or the guilt as about the reorientating how you think about these things. That sex is not about self and about self-fulfillment and self-enjoyment, but it is about giving yourself to another person within the safe, secure relationship of marriage, and that it's something to be honoured. It's exclusive, and it is set apart. It's holy, which is what then reflects the relationship you enjoy with Christ. That is a way of thinking about sex that I have had to re-educate myself on, or the Lord has re-educated me as He's changed my heart. But that is not, I can't pretend that I'm not still fighting that battle on a week-to-week basis.
Hope you're enjoying this week's episode of Ordinary. Remember, you can subscribe to the podcast on YouTube or on whichever platform you're listening so that you never miss a new episode.
What about you, Amy, in terms of that, what you bring into your new relationship that you're trying to do in a God-honouring way, and you've got all that kind of past? How does it work, and how does the gospel help you in that?
I think it might make me sound really bad, but for me personally, I don't think I struggled with changing my mindset when I got married to Adam. I was like, yep, this is how our relationship should be. This is how marriage should be. What's in the past is under the blood of Jesus. It's all done. That's gone. I think the rubble that I brought in was harder for Adam to deal with than it was for me. And I think, it took a long time for me to kind of acknowledge that it was painful for him. I think I was quite selfish, and I was like, it's my history, it's my mistakes. I carry the shame and the guilt and the pain for that, not you. Whereas, he's sort of saying, well, no, you know, I love you, I care for you, and I am jealous for you, which is, you know, a good thing for him to feel. And, you know, these things hurt me too. And I, you know, yeah, in that sense, I think it was more my rubble would affect him than me.
Yeah, I mean, it could affect... Oh, that's really helpful, and I'll come back to it in just a sec. But I suppose it might have affected you as well. It might have done, in that you couldn't trust anybody anymore, in that you'd not just had some sexual experiences before marriage, but you'd had some disappointments, I think. This is me being very middle-class British, isn't it, in talking about...
Disappointment. Yes, I had disappointments.
And that could have made you very sort of unwilling, like you were saying earlier. You might sort of give your body, but not your mind or your soul, because you were...
Yeah. I think I was quite shocked by him a lot of the time. Like, we hadn't been going out for a long time, and I remember him ringing me up and being like, so, you know, is this heading towards marriage? Like, this is heading towards marriage. And me being like, oh my goodness, we've been on, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 dates. And he's like, look, I'm not going to mess around. I don't just go out with people to see how it is and, you know, try before you buy or whatever. He's like, no, if I like you enough to ask you out, then it's heading in one direction and that's it. And, I think I was shocked, you know, probably a bit amused, but also it was quite, like, refreshingly nice to kind of feel like, oh, okay, you know, there isn't any... There's nothing else other than this. That's it. You know, it's very, yeah.
Yeah. So you didn't really feel, because you don't have to, have felt any sort of, I don't know, insecurity in the relationship, or you thought Adam might be like everybody else who just leaves you after a few months or a few years, or...
I think probably very early at the start, yes, you know, because I didn't know him, you know, like I know him now, I think. But it didn't take long before he was just very, just honest and straight up and just a good Christian man and you know, when that's all there is, there's nothing to second guess. There's nothing to worry, you know, that it... I mean, it sounds like he had to prove himself, but he didn't. He was just consistent, and I sound really romantic about him, but he was, and I think that, you know, and also I was growing in being a Christian as well, so I was sort of, the things I was learning, I was able to kind of put into practice very soon as well, because, you know, me becoming a Christian and getting married, it wasn't long after the other, so, you know, I think that was yeah.
I think coming back to your point about the jealousy, it just made me think about God. In a sense, God doesn't start married to us, but the kind of pictures in the Old Testament about how kind of jealousy is for his people who've been really unfaithful. Yeah. So in a way, you're kind of acting out that sort of righteous jealousy that God has for us, because he wants our love. Now, of course, you know, your husband or your wife doesn't deserve it in the same sort of glorious way that God does deserve your love. But there is some kind of parallel with that, in that jealousy is a good thing.
Yeah, definitely.
If it's jealousy for the object of your love, not the object of your sort of control or something, you know, if you're a human. But I think it's all right to be jealous because you love that person. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, Ollie.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I was just reading about... I read Isaiah 1 this morning, and, you know, God there talks about the adultery of his people, and how that both, you know, hurts and angers him. But that, you know, that's the glorious picture of is that he, despite that adultery, that he's gonna keep going back to his bride and keep wooing her back and winning her back and dealing with her past sins and shame. Now, it's that Book of Hosea is... I preached on just the first couple of chapters and the last few chapters of that. Missed out the middle because it felt more complicated. But, you know, I found that quite an emotional experience, a very powerful one, because it mirrors not only how I've acted in my past, it mirrors, all Christians to a certain extent are adulterous. That's what sin is, one of the pictures of sin. But also I think because I've come from a family where that's what happened with my parents, and so it connects on a number of different levels. But ultimately, it is that God will accept us back, completely forgiven, and not be afraid to connect himself to us, not be afraid that he's going to get hurt or let down again. He's in it, and he'll stay in it because he's committed himself to us, and that's the end of it.
I think part of us wanting to do this particular podcast was to recognise that lots of people who are Christians, even if they were Christians when it happened, had experiences outside of marriage, sexual experiences outside of marriage. And on the one hand, we want to recognise that that's not good, that's not God's way, and that it does leave some degree of rubble, whether it's for you personally or for the person you're with, or things that maybe come out at a later date. But at the same time, we wanted to say that the gospel means you can be forgiven of the shame of that, and you don't carry the guilt or the shame of that, and that you actually see God's love to you perhaps in a particular way because of those particular sins, and maybe see in it that the gospel modelled in that you've been unfaithful and yet he's faithful. I think the other thing we want to say is that even though perhaps those of us who've been brought up in Christian homes have had a different experience, just like Ollie said, we haven't got the neat lives that often non-Christians think we have. We haven't got the good hearts, that basically, the worst thing we ever did was perhaps, talk back at our parents or something, and that was it. There are many significant sins that we've done too, but also lots of heart sins against loads of knowledge. And, again, it doesn't make it right what anyone does just because they didn't know, but there is a degree of sadness that our culture is so sort of sex saturated and permissive that you guys growing up, and even more so our children's children, don't really know any better. And it's hard. It's where is the revelation from God saying this is good? Where are guys saying this is good, and we want to be the guys saying this is not just a rule that hems you in. This is a good thing that sets you free to be the kind of people God wants you to be. So that's some of the reasons. Do you want to say anything in wrapping up, Ollie? Because we're nearly at the end, and then if you want to say anything else, Amy too. Anything else you'd particularly like to kind of try and get across?
I think it's one of the books that I've found really helpful is a new one. It's called Closer by Adrian and Celia Reynolds. There it is.
Okay.
I think it's brilliant, but there's an appendix in the back of it which talks about moving on from past sexual sin. I think it's really helpful. He talks about you've got to be honest, both with God and with your partner. There's a need to, when I got married to Rachel, we both brought baggage from our past that we needed to work through, and that required honesty with each other. You've got to be wise about, you don't have to share every detail, but there is an honesty that needs to take place, and that's part of you confessing your sin. But that then leads to, there is a healing that takes place. So we have brought in Rubble. We have to work that through. At times we're still working that through, but it is better, and it keeps getting better. And the gospel repairs and restores, but also enables you to enjoy sex as it was meant to be, and to have that security and that intimacy. And that's a very hopeful thing. So, that's true whether that's about sexual sin or any sin, but it does apply to sexual sin as well.
Yeah, no, that's really great. Amy, anything you'd like to say on that or anything else just to close out?
I guess that going back to the rubble of bringing, in, although, yes, it's painful and it's terrible, and, if, I could do it again knowing what I know now, then I probably would. But I do think it's okay in some ways to be thankful that has been your journey, that is your history, because there is a lot in that which is adding positively to my marriage, and also me being a Christian now. I think obviously my children, but I think also being able to appreciate, I think, what God means for marriage and for relationships and for sex. I'm not saying that you can't appreciate that if you haven't had those experiences, but for me personally, I'm okay with being thankful for some of those bad things, if that makes sense in any way.
It does. I think it is like it often gets used, but the idea in Genesis where Joseph talks about his brothers purposing for bad, sending him to Egypt, selling him as a slave, and so on. But God purposed it for good.
Yeah.
So he doesn't say it was okay you sold me into slavery, but he does say, actually, I've actually learned quite a lot through this process, and I'm now Pharaoh's second in command, and I'm now saving you guys from famine. There's lots of ways in which God does that. Well, it's been really good having you both on. Thank you for sharing, and hopefully people will find it helpful. Email us at ordinary@sxxnt.org.uk with any questions and comments. Thanks for listening.
Hi, thanks for listening to this episode of Ordinary. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please hit the subscribe button on YouTube right now. Thanks for listening.